Hey everybody, it's Cam here. Today I want to talk about my 5 favorite books that are the second book in a series. Most of the time, as I have mentioned, the first book in a series is always my favorite book in a series, even if it's not the best one. And a lot of that has to do with that I feel like I get that new series high every time I start a new series. And so sometimes even if like book 1 is not the best book in a series, it's still usually my favorite one and the one that's the most memorable to me. And for the most part, that's going to be true. But somehow in the last basically 40 days, I've actually read 2 trilogies where the second book in the series is not only better, but that second book might actually end up somewhere in like my top 25 favorite books of all time. Whenever I finally get around to doing a list like that, those books will. And there are about 2 or 3 other ones that I decided to put on this list as well that would also be in that top 25 for me. The number 1 book that will be on this list would be somewhere in either my top 5 or 10 favorite books of all time. So, 5 seemed like a good number to do a list with because, I don't know why. 5, nice round number. Not too many to make too long of an episode and not too short to not be important. An important thing to note, too, before I get started on that list is that all 5 of these series are completed. There's actually a couple of other series that I've read within the last, 6 months or so that might have a second book that would have made this list if the series was complete, but I only wanted to do ones that were. And then there's going to be a couple of series, like, for example, the Malazan series. I actually think that the 3rd and 4th books, and maybe the 6th as well, I think those are my favorite ones. But I want this to be the second book in a series, whether it's trilogy or longer. I only cheat one time where the 2nd and 3rd books are co-favorites for me, and that will be on my 4th one here, so once I get to that, I'll talk about it. All right, number 5 is The King of Thorns by Mark Lawrence, the second book in the Broken Empire trilogy. This series is one of 6 books. There's 2 trilogies, The Red Queen's War being the second, that are set in the same world by Mark Lawrence, and I actually think that all in all, I probably like the second series a little bit better, but the first Prince of Thorns, then King of Thorns, and then the 3rd one, Emperor of Thorns, are what got me into Grimdark in the first place, and also what got me into the Spiffbo competitions because of Mark Lawrence being the author. So this is always going to be one of those most influential series for me. This is a very controversial series in general. Jorg is a very controversial MC. As the series starts in Prince of Thorns, he's like 13 or 14 years old. He's already the leader of a murderous band of thugs. There are more than one rape at the beginning of the series, and Jorg, even though he's only 13, has already taken part in some pretty atrocious behaviors. He's absolutely an anti-hero. And so there's really, it's a divided series where some people absolutely hate it. My wife hated it. I really just enjoyed the darkness of it. I realized that, that there's a lot of bad things that happen, and I don't condone those bad things that happen, but just the writing style of Mark Lawrence, his prose being so tight, and it's just like he just gets so much information into his works. His 300 to 400 page books have as much in them as an 800 page book by anyone that came before. And so I feel like, it was just such an impactful series on me. And one thing, having gone back and reread them a couple times now, the Prince of Thorns was his first book, and I really don't think it's all that amazing of a book once I go back and reread the series. And, I read them the first time. I read all 6 books in a row. And so I think that, it kind of got lost a little bit that his writing skill improved so much from Prince of Thorns to King of Thorns that I just didn't realize it the first time around, and I realize it more and more so now, to where every single book that Mark Lawrence puts out, he is better. And I feel like the jump, though, between Prince of Thorns to King of Thorns was just, leaps and bounds. And so I feel like, King of Thorns is that first book that I really was like, man, this is amazing. His writing style is so good. Obviously, it still follows Jorg. He's managed to make it a little bit farther down his path to becoming the Emperor of the Broken Throne. But he's obviously not there yet. And I'm going to try to still keep this whole thing as spoiler-free as possible. Number 4 on my list is actually the time that I'm going to cheat a little bit. As I mentioned, my favorite series of all time is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan / Brandon Sanderson. And so I'm going to put the Great Hunt / The Dragon Reborn as the number 4 on my list. I realize I'm cheating, but hey, it's my own episode. I can do what I want to do, right? I think that The Great Hunt and then The Dragon Reborn are the two best books in that 14-book series. And for me, they're the ones that I just like to have the most nostalgia for. And that when I go back and I remember individual scenes, more of them come from those two books than any other. The first book in The Wheel of Time, of course, is where we first meet our Edmondsfield Five and Moraine and Lan. And I feel like at times it can be a little bit disjointed. I still really enjoy the book, and I've read it probably like 15 times over the course of my life. But I think that, being objective, but book 2, where Rand starts to, see his own powers, we first meet Lanfear. Then Matt, of course, he's got the dagger, so he is going to be dealing with an awful lot of pain and him and Perrin are off on their own as well. Perrin hasn't gotten whiny yet. Perrin is just a character that as the series goes on, I just dislike more and more over the years. His whole, I just want to be a simple blacksmith shtick when, the whole world in some ways is dependent on him. I can't handle it, but I still really like Perrin at this point. He first meets Gaul, he saves him there. And I just really feel like that, especially book 2 and into book 3, we're dealing with, everyone still being a great character. Egwene, of course, this is where she gets captured by the Seanchan, where we first meet them. And you know what? I really disliked Egwene for a long time, but a friend of mine actually was like, well, she was, like 14, 15 years old. She gets captured. She's going to end up with, PTSD and real trust issues and things because of what happens to her, right? So once I, heard that, it really changed my, my entire impression of Egwene. And it really does, change everything about her because of, that captivity and being a domain. The thing with where I add book 3 into this as well, though, is that my single favorite scene in the entire 14-book series is when Matt defeats Gawain and Galad as with his quarterstaff while he is at Tar Valon. And I don't know, I've always loved that scene. And we still get, a lot of enjoyment where Rand is still not quite, fully in his powers, and he's not completely serious yet and imperious. So I really feel like books 2 and 3 are just like the absolute pinnacle of the series. And not that I don't love, some of the later books still. It's just more that we still have that more of that lighthearted feel about the series in books 2 and 3. Number 3 on my list is Master Assassin by Robin Hobb, the second book in the Farseer trilogy, which is, of course, the first trilogy in the much larger Realm of the Elderlings. This book, I just felt like when I just recently read it, like a week ago, it was so good. It's going to be on my favorite books of 2024 that I read. This year, obviously, it's a book from, I think, like 97, maybe 96. So it's a fairly old book. But it was just, I feel like book 1, we deal with Fitz, the main character, being a child for a big part of it. And then he's, in his early teens when a majority of book 1 takes place. And so we still have to deal with a lot of him like growing up and things like that. But book 2, we just have the full power of, dealing with all of the meat of the story with the Red Ship Raiders arc that that were like they're the outside existential threat. And we still get, all that internal politics of the Six Duchies as well, where, Fitz and his master assassin Chade have to deal with the internal politics with Prince Regal. And it's just, I feel like a true masterpiece of a novel where from the beginning to end, it is action-packed. And Hobb actually makes a choice with this series where In a lot of epic fantasies, there's a journey that has to take place. I feel like maybe that's part of where going back to number 4 on this list, the Wheel of Time. There's a journey for so much of the book, but there's a lot of action and a lot of things happen during that journey. And in the case of the Farseer trilogy here, the Royal Assassin, book 3 is where the journey happens in this case, and I don't feel like quite as much action happens during it. So book 3 isn't nearly, in my opinion, at the level that books 1 and 2 are. But so in this case, we have to get, introduce things in book 1 and have a child for part of that book. And then book 2, we have Fitz as he's in his early 20s, and where we just get all of the action. We don't have to deal with that initial world building, and the journey gets postponed until book 3. So there's no real lull for me in that case. And I'm probably, one of these days I'll put together like a top 10 or top 25 list of my favorite single books ever. And it is going to be on that list somewhere, in the top 10, maybe top 15 at worst. So number 2 on my list, though, is the Kings of Ash in the Ash and Sand trilogy by Richard Nell. This one, for years and years, was the book that I listed as my favorite second book of any series of all time. And it got bumped down one just recently for me back in December, and I'll talk about number 1 here shortly. But this book, I will tell you right now that there are not a ton of times in my life where while reading a book, I've actually jumped up and said, hell yeah. And I do it multiple times during some of the like magical battle scenes in this book. Without getting too much into the spoilers here, what the Ash and Sand series is, and I feel really stupid. My Grimdark, my top 5 Grimdark list of all time, I somehow forgot it, despite this being one of my favorite books of all time. I would put this book in my top 5 favorite books of ever. And so I somehow, omitted it. But this series, it starts off book 1. We have one main character named Ruka. There's a couple of others as well, a female whose name is escaping me at the moment. But Ruka is early 20s maybe when the book starts. He's an outcast. He was born like ugly. Everyone's born as twins in this series, and he is born solo, so they just assume he consumed his twin in utero. And he's like a demon. He's an outcast. He should have been killed as a child, but his mother didn't want to. She kept him. And as the book starts in book 1, he is actually eating another child, cannibalizing a child in order to survive. When I was first reading book 1, I kind of saw it in black and white. It was just so bleak. We're in like a almost like a Siberia-like part of the planet, where the main part of the book 1 takes place. Well, book 2 takes place there, but it also takes place in like a paradise islands, kind of like the Hawaiian Islands or something like that, right? Well, I think that you combine the amazing writing, the awesome main character of Ruka, his unique magic system that we get to see in book 2, that's like a really cool, like in his mind, that he's able to pull things out and just basically just be a badass sorcerer, warrior, right? And because of that tropical part of the story to go along with it, it was like in my mind, it brightened things up, and I suddenly saw the world in color again. And Ruka is my favorite main character in all of fantasy, and I don't know that it's even all that close. I mean, I love Matt, but if you, at this point, were going to tell me like I can read more Brandon Sanderson stories of Matt or more Richard Nell stories of Ruka, then I'm going to choose Ruka right now at this point. Maybe back when we had Robert Jordan Matt, but I don't particularly enjoy the way that Brandon Sanderson wrote Matt in comparison. I feel like things took a real step back when Sanderson started writing Matt. And that first book, I feel like he treated him like he was still, a teenager trying to pinch serving women's bottoms in a tavern, right? As opposed to being the military genius that he was by that point. And so I think that Ruka, he's just such a unique character. He is definitely an anti-hero, just like Jorg is. But Jorg is still charismatic and, always described as attractive, and people, would want to follow him. Ruka, people don't want to follow Ruka. He is going to take every ounce of his power because of his sheer skill and his dogged determinist and just sheer ability, right? He doesn't have any of the advantages that you might think. I mean, even Jorg, right? He's a prince before he ends up losing his spot and then having to go forward. But Ruka was supposed to have been killed as a baby, and he's an outcast, and he still manages to do what he does. Just cannot recommend the Ash and Sand trilogy if you are a Grimdark fan enough. But you have to be a Grimdark fan. Once again, every time I get the opportunity, I feel like it's penance where I have to tell you that I'm an idiot. And I one time, actually, while talking with Richard Nell, was like, have you ever thought about writing something not quite so dark? And that was when I was talking with him about how I saw book 1 in black and white because of how, bleak the landscape was that we were dealing with. And then once I read book 2, I was like, man, I'm an idiot. Because if he, had written something less grimdark, because then I wouldn't have had the masterpiece of the Kings of Ashes. Number 1, and my new, as of December, favorite second book of any series of all time is A Blight of Blackwings by Kevin Hearne. It is the second book in the 7 Kenning series. I'd probably gonna have to put this one in my top 5 favorite books of all time. I haven't, until doing this list, I haven't really put individual books as opposed to like individual series in order as much, but I can't think of too many more books that would at least push it out of the top 10. I think Kings of Ash is going to be, if this one's 9, then Kings of Ash would be 10. Maybe another year or so, I'll put together a list of my top 25 individual books of all time. But this series, the entire 7 Kenning series, I just loved it. I love the magic system. I've done a review of this recently, and I actually did a podcast episode before that. We have a magic system where basically in order to get your magical blessing from your god, you have to be willing to commit suicide, whether it's jumping into a sinkhole, going into quicksand, jumping into a lake of lava. I mean, there's a good chance, at best 60% chance you're going to live, and with the worst case one, you have less than a 20% chance that you're going to live, by trying to get your magical ability. So there is risk in your getting your magical ability, and if you use your magical ability too strongly, then it ages you. So, I mean, we're talking magic system that's just amazing, and if you want stakes, then there's some pretty high stakes to get your magical ability. And then the world building was really amazing as well. And it's told as a story from a bard who has his magical ability is to be able to actually look and sound like other people. And he has to tell the truth so people know that what he's telling is the truth. And I feel like book 1 was really awesome. And book 3 was pretty darn good too. I do feel like maybe book 3 started to coast a little bit sooner than I would have liked it. But book 2 is going to be like the same situation as with the Farseer trilogy, where we got all of the initial world building that we needed to out of the way with book 1. And then in book 3, you wrap things up. But in this case, we still get an awful lot of like cool world building in book 2. But we know the main characters already. There's not too many of them, but there are quite a few. And we really get to see every part of this amazing world that Kevin Hearne has built. And I feel like in book 2 as well, you get the most of my absolute favorite characters. I have 2 or 3 characters that I really, really loved. And you get a big solid dose of them in that. And the 7 Kennings represent, we're talking about 7 different places. And in this series, the 2 big things that happen are giant invasions. And I mean, we're talking like one set of giants is like 14 feet tall, and the others are like 10, so like legitimately giants. And the ones that are like 14 feet tall are the lava. They're the fire giants. They can burn people with fire. And so the normal sized people of the continent are trying to fight off those invasions with, their own magical abilities as well. And I just feel like we get to see, the entire world. It's very, very rare that even if an author builds an amazing world, I mean, we're talking Tolkien, right? He built so much world. And if you went back and you looked at a bunch of his, compendium books and research and backstory, you get to see the wider world, but you're not going to see that in the books as much, right? In the main series or even the Hobbit. Same thing with like George R. R. Martin. I have that, coffee table book behind me, where we get to see, more of the world in that case than maybe in some other instances. But even still, a lot of what we know about the world takes place from these other books, these compendium books and things like that. In the Seven Kenning series, we really do get to see each of the 6 or 7 places on that main continent, and they're so different. We have forests, we have grasslands, like the savanna. We have the volcanic, like Iceland-ish. Think like colder places. All of the different places are so unique, and the people are different. The magic, every country's magic system is completely different, and it shapes everything about their world, and it's just done so well. The writing is amazing. I mean, I really feel like book 2 is just an absolute masterpiece of a book. I do not think that it could have been written any better, and the whole series, the whole Seven Kenning series, I think that, it should be even more well-known than it is, and I think that you should go out and you should read the books. It's got a really good narrator, too, for the audiobooks, although I prefer to read them over listening. I think my wife has listened a couple times now. But it's just an amazing series. In that book, too, we get so much action. We still get to have world building because we're, going to new places all the time. But, we're not like having to get things initially explained to us, and it hasn't started winding down yet. Just an amazing, amazing series. And A Blight of Black Wings is, it's probably no worse than top 10 of my favorite individual books of all time. So once again, Blight of Black Wings at number 1, Kings of Ash by Richard Nell in the Ash and Sand series, number 2. Number 3 would be Master Assassin by Robin Hobb from the Farseer trilogy. Number 4 is My Cheat. That's The Great Hunt and the Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan for the Wheel of Time. And number 5 is The King of Thorns from the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. I would be interested to hear what your favorite second books in a series are, or even what series, a book farther in the series is your favorite of. I know, like if we're talking Malazan, I think probably books 4 and 6 are my favorite. At some point, I'll have to break down my tiers of the books in Malazan, because I do really feel like there's some unevenness in that series. But I just feel like it's so funny to me that, within like a 40-day period, I found 2 books that are, going to be somewhere in my top 10 to 15 of books of all time, when, I've gone 30 years of reading and only had 2 or 3 books that were a book 2 that would have been on that list prior to this. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day and have some great reading. Thank you. Bye.